Welcome back to Grifter or Gifted. You know the drill. We look at someone who's made a big splash, someone controversial, and try to figure out, are they changing the world or just lining their pockets?
And today's deep dive is doozy.
Oh, yeah. Today we're tackling Aaron Hernandez,
Former NFL star.
convicted murderer.
And it's a story that really gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here on the show.
Because on the surface, you've got this incredibly talented athlete.
Mm.
But then there's this dark side, this whole other story.
Exactly. And we've got a mountain of sources to dig through. Court documents, sports articles, biographies.
We've even got some pop culture takes in the mix. There's the American Sports Stories series, and that really interesting Newsweek article by Michelle McPhee, the journalist who broke the story about Hernandez's alleged sexuality.
So buckle up, because this one's going to take us to some unexpected places.
For sure. And the big question we're wrestling with is, can someone be both gifted and deeply troubled?
Right. And how do we reconcile those two sides?
Like, where do we even begin with this guy?
Well, I think the best place to start is at the beginning. Back when he was just a kid tearing it up on the high school football field.
High school Hernandez was a phenomenon. We're talking All-American status, breaking records left and right.
The kid everyone thought was destined for greatness.
He had the size, the talent, the drive. He was 6'2" and known for just outworking everyone on the team. But even back then...
What were those whispers, right?
Exactly. Drug use, anger issues, a really tough family life. You know, his dad passed away when he was just 16.
A lot of baggage for someone so young.
It's like the classic tale of raw talent mixed with a troubled background. And that pattern just continued when he went to college at the University of Florida.
Huge football program, huge expectations.
And he's playing alongside Tim Tebow. I mean, talk about pressure.
But he thrives, right? They win a national championship in 2009.
Big success. But behind the scenes, it wasn't all sunshine and roses.
Not at all. He needed remedial courses, clashed with coaches, had some off-field issues.
You have to wonder if people were turning a blind eye because of his talent on the field.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Was it a case of his talent creating this halo effect?
Right, like everyone was so focused on his potential that they ignored the red flags.
And that's a thread we're going to see throughout his story. Even when he was drafted into the NFL by the New England Patriots in 2010, there were concerns about his character.
But the Patriots took a chance, and at first it seemed like a genius move.
I mean, Hernandez and Gronkowski, that was a dynamic duo.
Super Bowls, breaking records, the fame, the fortune. He had it all.
Yeah, but even at the height of his success, those cracks in the facade kept getting wider.
Bar fights, that double shooting investigation where he's a person of interest.
The trouble just seemed to follow him.
It's almost like there was this constant push and pull.
Right.
The dazzling athlete versus this darker side that kept emerging.
Exactly. So how do we reconcile those two sides?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Was it a case of nature versus nurture? Were these destructive tendencies always there? Or did the pressure, the fame, the environment contribute to his downfall?
Yeah, and all of this is before the 2012 double homicide that really changed everything.
That's where things take a really dark turn.
And we're going to delve into all of that next.
So we left off with Aaron Hernandez at the top of his game in the NFL. Star tight end, Super Bowl appearances, the $41 million contract extension. But like you said, the trouble kept following him.
And it's about to escalate in a big way.
Because now we're getting into the murder of Odin Lloyd in 2013.
This is where the story goes from troubled athlete to something much more serious.
Lloyd's body was found just miles from Hernandez's home.
And the evidence starts piling up pretty quickly.
It wasn't just circumstantial either.
No, not at all. Surveillance footage actually shows Lloyd getting into a car with Hernandez just hours before he disappeared.
And then they found shell casings from a .45 caliber handgun in the rental car Hernandez had been driving.
You really start to see this pattern of reckless behavior just spiraling out of control. It's not just bar fights anymore.
The stakes are incredibly high now.
Absolutely. And what's really wild is that this all happens just after Hernandez signs that massive contract extension with the Patriots.
$41 million. You'd think that would be a moment for him to, I don't know, maybe get his act together.
Right. You'd expect him to be on top of the world, but instead there's this dark cloud hanging over everything.
And it all comes crashing down when he's arrested for Lloyd's murder.
Talk about a fall from grace.
1 minute, you're a star athlete with a huge contract. The next, you're facing a murder charge.
And the trial itself was a media frenzy. Everyone was following it.
And throughout the trial, Hernandez maintains his innocence. But the prosecution presents a pretty damning case.
They had that surveillance footage we talked about. They had text messages between Hernandez and Lloyd leading up to the murder. And then there's the testimony of Alexander Bradley.
Alexander Bradley. Remind me about him.
Bradley was a former friend of Hernandez, and he claimed that Hernandez had actually shot him in the face just months before Lloyd's murder.
Whoa, that's intense.
Yeah, and his testimony was really damaging to Hernandez's case.
So you've got this pattern of violence emerging, and at this point, it's hard not to wonder, was he just a gifted athlete who made some really bad choices? Or was there something more sinister going on?
Was he a grifter, maybe? Manipulating people, hiding his true nature?
It's a tough question. But the jury ultimately found Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder.
And he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
At that point, it felt like the final chapter of this incredibly tragic story.
But that's not the end, is it?
No, because there was still that 2012 double homicide case hanging over his head.
Right. Hernandez had been indicted for the murders of Daniel D'Abrio and Safiro Furtado.
2 men shot and killed in a drive-by shooting in Boston.
And some of the evidence in that case suggested the motive might have stemmed from, get this, a spilled drink at a nightclub.
Wait, a spilled drink? Seriously?
That's what they were saying. And it really makes you think, if that's true, what does that say about his state of mind?
Like such a minor incident triggering such a violent act.
Right. Was it impulsivity, a hair-trigger temper, or could it be a sign of something like CTE, the brain damage we know he had?
We'll definitely get into the CTE in a bit, but for now, let's stick with the double homicide trial. What happened there?
Well, in a surprising turn of events, Hernandez was acquitted of all charges in that case.
Acquitted? After being found guilty in the Lloyd case?
Yeah, it was a shocker. It almost felt like there might be a glimmer of hope for him. Maybe a chance to appeal the Lloyd conviction.
But then, just a few days after that acquittal.
Hernandez takes his own life in his prison cell.
Just like that.
He hanged himself. And they found 3 suicide notes. 1 to his fiancée, Cheyenne, 1 to his daughter, and 1 to his lawyer.
I remember hearing about those notes. There was something eerie about them.
Yeah, there was a lot of speculation about their meaning, especially the 1 to his lawyer.
It said, "You're rich now." What did he mean by that?
People have come up with all sorts of theories. Some think he was trying to set his lawyer up for something. Others think it was just a bitter parting shot. Who knows?
We may never really understand what was going through his head in those final moments.
No, we probably won't. But then, after his death, another twist.
The CTE diagnosis.
Right. They found severe brain damage, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
CTE. It's that degenerative brain disease they're finding in a lot of football players.
Exactly, and it's caused by repeated blows to the head.
And Hernandez, playing football his whole life, I mean, he must have taken a lot of hits.
No doubt. And the symptoms of CTE can be devastating. Memory loss, impaired judgment, aggression, even dementia.
So how much did this disease play a role in his behavior? Could it explain the violence, the impulsiveness?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it definitely adds another layer of complexity to this already tragic story.
And it makes you think about the physical and mental toll that comes with playing a sport like football at such a high level.
And then on top of all of that, you have the revelations about Hernandez's alleged struggles with his sexuality.
Right. There's the Netflix documentary, and then his brother did some interviews.
And it raises questions about how much societal pressures, the fear of being judged, contributed to his inner turmoil.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And it just goes to show you never really know what's going on behind closed doors, even with someone who seems to have it all.
So much to unpack here.
Yeah.
You know, we've got this incredibly talented athlete, but also this really dark, violent side. And the CTE diagnosis just throws another wrench into the whole thing.
It really does. Makes you question everything, doesn't it?
It does. Like, how much of his behavior was him and how much was the brain damage?
Exactly. And where do we even begin to try and separate those two things?
Maybe a good place to start is with the people who knew him best. His family, his friends, his teammates.
Yeah, getting their perspective is crucial.
Because they saw a different side of him than the public did.
Right. And we've got those interviews with the Pouncey twins, his former teammates at Florida.
They were really close to him, and they've always maintained his innocence.
They talked about how he was deeply affected by his father's death, how he struggled to cope with the pressure of fame.
And they really emphasized his loyalty, how he would do anything for the people he cared about.
Then there's Sheanna Jenkins, his fiancée. She stood by him through everything, even when she was facing her own legal troubles.
It's hard to imagine what she went through.
She always painted this picture of him as a loving father, a devoted partner, Someone very different from the monster the media was portraying.
And it makes you think, doesn't it, about the different sides we all have, the public face we put on versus who we really are behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And it also raises those questions about loyalty and forgiveness, you know? How far would you go for someone you love, even if they've done terrible things?
But we also have to consider the perspective of Odin Lloyd's family. They lost a son, a brother.
And they have every right to be angry, to want justice.
For them, it doesn't matter how talented Hernandez was or what his personal struggles were.
Their pain is real, and it's a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of his actions.
Right, and it's easy to get caught up in the details of the case, the legal battles, the CTE diagnosis, but we can't lose sight of the fact that real people were hurt, real lives were lost.
Exactly. It's not just a story, it's a tragedy.
So after all of this, where do we even land on that central question? Grifter or gifted?
Is there even an answer to that question? Can someone be both?
I mean, he was clearly a gifted athlete. That much is undeniable. But he was also deeply troubled.
And we may never fully understand what drove him to do the things he did.
The CTE definitely complicates the picture, but it doesn't excuse his actions.
No, it doesn't. But it does make you think about the role of mental health, the impact of trauma, the responsibility we have to look out for each other.
So maybe there isn't a simple answer here. Maybe it's not about picking a side, about labeling him as one thing or the other.
Maybe it's about recognizing the complexity, the nuance, the fact that people can be both good and bad, capable of great things and terrible things.
And maybe it's a reminder that we should never stop questioning, never stop trying to understand the forces that shape us, the choices we make, and the impact we have on others.
Because that's what it's all about, right? Trying to make sense of the world, to learn from the past, and to hopefully build a better future.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving.